I felt a finger poke and dig deeper into my cheek, as my drool fell like a waterfall. My eyelids felt like sandbags as I struggled to open them, and as the blur ceased, a figure I recognized anywhere was put into perspective. There, with her rosy cheeks and ear-to-ear grin, was my little sister, holding up a stuffed teddy bear, and that teddy bear held a large storybook. The same book I always see in my nightmares. The same book she makes me read every night, for the last 3 nights. Again with the fairy tales. Can't you see I'm sleeping here? I said, exhausted as I tossed back and forth, rolled over to the opposite side to avoid her puppy dog eyes that she'll eventually make and I will eventually fall to, because I am a very weak individual who spoils his little sister rotten. Oh, come on, big bro. Just this once. I just want to finish the story. Her voice felt like sweet honey to my ears, a mix of pleading and sincerity that can only come out from such an innocent soul. I grit my teeth as I took a throw pillow and covered my exposed ear to it, thus blocking her spell completely. Of course, she hadn't stopped as I felt her little body pushing me from the sofa and afterwards trying to pull me out. Then it stopped. I could no longer feel her prodding and unrelenting annoyance. I guess this victory goes to me. Though, I did feel bad crushing her little hopes like that. What was I to do? If I spoil her more, then she'll eventually cling to me like some sort of parasite, and I'm pretty sure that the title had already belonged to me, but I guess it's kind of a win if my little sister would like to be like her college dropout brother. On second thought, forget I said that. But still, there was something in my mind that wouldn't halt. My heart started thumping like drums being aggressively stomped on by a Tour de France contestant as I felt something was wrong. And in an instant, it fell on me like a ton of bricks. To put it clearer, she fell on me like a ton of bricks. What's wrong with you? I asked as I picked her up from her shoulders, carrying her like a life-size doll. She only stared at me blankly as she hit her face with the storybook again. To describe it clearer, the storybook carried by a stuffed bear to emphasize how hard she was trying to melt my heart. And I applaud her, because it did melt my heart and fractured a fair amount of my ribs. Okay, I give up, you win. Just give me a little breather, okay, princess? I asked, stretching my back as I felt her nod in both approval and victory. Balancing house chores, finding a job, and acting as a plaything for my little sister was exhausting for a young man, but I guess I couldn't have the right to complain, nor do I have the energy to. My ears perked up as hoof-like thuds began ringing across the house. Immediately, a fluorescent light bulb lit up on the top of my head as an idea began to shine. I extended my hand at the little girl with the light chocolate brown hair tied into a ponytail, as she complied immediately, as we both skipped merrily in the direction where the old grumpy troll sat and drank his brew. "Good evening, grandfather," we both said in unison as the gruff old man sighed as though he had just inhaled a pound of smoke. His old withered eyes stared at me with intensity as it shifted toward his cane. Clearly, he was about to make a run for it. "Alice, get the cane!" I said, shouting, as she sprinted towards the cane, but even with her speed, I knew she wouldn't be able to beat the quick scoop of an old man filled with caffeine, so the only thing I could do to help is distract him. But how? "Hey, grandfather, Elvis is dead!" I yelled as he stopped in his tracks, long enough for Alice to grab the cane and, within that split second, run back to me as I held the cane smugly, like the slickest, sexiest, most charming pimp, this side of the Red District dark alleyway. My grandfather only glared at me like he was about to shoot lasers from his eyes, like one of those X-Men, as I could feel a telepathic voice repeat over and over, "You're the biggest disappointment in my life." This was a win and lose situation for me, as my heart split into feeling proud of my petty accomplishment and feeling proud of my petty accomplishment. "What do you want, parasite?" he said sternly as I felt a little piece of me pile-drived and pinned into a mat. "Well, grandfather, I was thinking..." The deal was food and shelter, nothing more. Parasite, he said in retort as he sipped another cup of his coffee. No, I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a story, I said as my words made him gulp his coffee rather abruptly. He began coughing as he covered his mouth with his hand formed into a fist. Why on earth would you want that? Didn't you hate my stories? He said, astonished. Well, yeah, but it did give me a few lessons, and believe me, I'll never forget them, so I was wondering if you could do the same with Alice. I mean, she's spoiled, you see. And whose fault is that? He asked as I quickly answered with my wittiest retort. The government. Thanks, Obama. You need it, all right. I guess I have no choice. You won't give me my cane back unless I give you a decent story. I guess it'll help pass the time, he said as he motioned me to take a seat, as I again prepared my wittiest of retorts. Yeah, you cannot leave until we say so. He sighed once more and began telling us a story. Box. It's a game that comes from God knows where, but all I do remember is that it's a game. Dangerous one. More dangerous than Russian roulette with a full chamber, he said gruffly, as I took a seat along with Alice, who sat on my lap. Everything's a blur. I don't even remember what date it was, but I do remember what prompted me to play such a game. He took a large sip from a nearly empty coffee cup and exhaled. Annoyance. I played that game because I was annoyed. Annoyed of my little brother. Little brother? But we don't have a granduncle, I suddenly blurted out in surprise. You had one. Remarkably, it's my own fault that he no longer is with us. Whoa, you killed him? I asked. Not in the sense of murder in the first degree, but I pretty much did kill him. Yeah. In the same rules as a judge sentences a jailer to the electric chair. And I'm not going to tell you the entire detail about replicating the box game. I'm afraid you'll either be too stupid or your little sister's too naive to actually listen to my warnings, he said as his eyes began examining me, who was inching my hands closer for a cookie, and Alice, whose eyes were the size of dinner plates. You two will inevitably try to imitate it, but for the sake of telling a story, I'll tell you just another method of the ritual. A person has to sit down, cross-sitting position on the floor. And as a person holds his hands together and outstretches his arms, forming a hoop with his clasped hands, and then that person slowly lets down the hoop as he says, "You are now inside the box." After saying that and reaching the hip of the person who's sitting, he'll then again lift his hands up while saying the phrase again. At this time, that person must mouth it. That way the person sitting would think that he's gone deaf. That's why it's called the box, because it's supposed to simulate that you're inside a soundless, invisible box. Sounds innocent enough, but why is it so dangerous? And if you're forming your hand into a ring, shouldn't it be called the hoop? I asked as I munched on the cookie, though I looked composed. The thought of my dead uncle still bothered me a bit. I guess I'll prod on the subject later when my little sister's no longer around. It was just supposed to be a prank, but I had to improve it and ignore the name. I wasn't the one who made it. Improve it? I asked. Yeah. In addition of imitating deafness, I also imitated blindness. What's wrong with that? It's basically just ignoring someone, right? I asked, trying to comically lighten the mood. It would be called ignoring if the box ritual wasn't involved. He always annoyed me, you know. I was 2 years older and was the peak of maturing. In the teens, thinking that they're mature at the age of 13 kind of mindset. I don't want to be seen around him. He was fat and hyperactive and a nuisance. What every pessimistic teenager writing poems and haikus hated. Will you drop it? He said flatly, causing me to stop my further poking. Let's just say that on the side I had other interests, but the occult. It was always just on the side. I tried rituals and such, and always knew that they'd never work. They never did. But along the lines, I was successful, even if I wasn't aware of it back then. So you summoned a demon? I asked, my interest amped to 11. I did. But we'll talk about that later. Let's go back to talking about the box game. Thinking back at it now, I guess I confused a prank I found in an old joke book and turned it into some sort of unfinished ritual from one of my occult books, but they never worked on anybody who was normal. My brother wasn't normal. My colleagues who claimed to see auras often told me that he was emitting something powerful and that he had his third eye open all the time. Of course, I wouldn't expect a demon-like power to come from such a jolly child, but that's not always the case. A genie can take a room, put it in any lamp that genie pleases, after all. It was a day I couldn't remember, but I did know that his annoyance had become too strong, or was it because I was too full of angst? I would have slapped him for his constant babbling and nonsensical quips, but a part of me didn't want to. Call it kindness or just the fear of the folks punishing me afterward, but my revenge was supposed to be just a harmless prank. But I didn't know how dangerous that game was. It was supposed to be just a prank, just a simple prank, a petty one at that. So I put him in the box and pretended not to hear him. I acted like I covered him inside a soundproof box as he shouted and yelled, hissed and barked. I remember that they were deafening. If I wasn't pretending to be deaf, I would have been from his noise, he said, rubbing his temples. His expression held a bothersome look mixed in with nostalgia and soon a contorted face of regret. I was about to end the entire charade right then and there, but he just suddenly made a face full of surprise, followed by a quick dash to somewhere. I didn't even bother chasing him. I just enjoyed the peace, he said, forming a slight grin on his lips, a pitiful grin that took every ounce of his strength. Did he hear a spirit? I asked in wonder. I have no idea. I don't know what put him into a trance that day. It was the angelic voice of an angel or a temptation of a demon. Either way, when he ran as if it was the most important race in the world. The next day I found him with a smile on his face, and his eyes gleamed with pure happiness when he saw me. He explained that because of the box game, he could now hear Tony Tuntun. Tony Tuntun was his imaginary friend that I thought had grown out of, but clearly I was wrong. He then began rambling about how Tony had such a great voice, very calming, very soothing, very soft. I should have taken that as a warning sign, but like a rational person, I dismissed it as simply a child's fantasy. I wish I hadn't, but then again, there's more than one thing I wish I hadn't done in my lifetime. Regret's so familiar now that I keep making mistakes because the pain of regret no longer stings. I guess it has its perks, somehow. So, did he run away with Tony? I asked, still intrigued by the story. I'm getting to that, Paraboy. After noon had passed, I found him drawing in his room with crayons, paint, and even colored condiments like jam and peanut butter. Of course, I quickly apprehended him and flat out yelled at him for the mess that he had made. I would have nagged his head off for it, if it wasn't for the way he looked. Quite exhausted and, disheveled. A look I never would have expected from a child his age. When I confronted him, he explained that he was trying to draw Tony because Tony said that he looked different from how he originally drew him. I remember that crude drawing of a kangaroo-like thing with large wings and fuzzy arms stuck to the wall of our refrigerator that Well, that was what he would call Tony. But now the voice said otherwise. All around I could see smudged drawings and sketches of Tony all marked with an X, made with red crayon. Seeing the mess he made and how he was visibly exhausted, I couldn't help but try my best to at least help him in drawing his imaginary friend. And I gathered all my art supplies and I told him to tell me exactly what Tony looked like, at least how Tony viewed himself. And he told me that Tony described himself as a guy with a large mouth that reached his stomach, a large head of an octopus, and the torso and arms of a gorilla. That's kinda, I said, a little disturbed. Weird. Yeah, it was. That was the same thing that popped into my mind as I finished. An entity with a large alien-like head and a mouth open like a broken ventriloquist dummy, and massive arms and torso of a gorilla. Sounds weird but tame. But when I asked him about the legs of his imaginary friend, he innocently responded that he doesn't have any. And when I asked about the eyes, he just gave the same response. Finally, just telling myself to ignore it, I asked what color the skin was so that I could color it. He said, it's the same color that lies beneath our skin. And that didn't disturb you? I asked, prodding him. It did. But I guess he was just loosely describing the color pink. And after that, he told me to put him once again into the box so that he could hear what Tony had to say. I blindly agreed, and he scampered off again. You just dismissed it like that? I asked, quite dumbfounded. My grandfather was always think first, and then move. This wasn't like him. Call it youth. Maybe that's why I'm so cautious, but either way, everything was harmless. My prank was harmless. The effects were harmless. Enough. That's why I dismissed everything and called it a day I call every day. There wasn't him talking about his imaginary friend. As normal, as harmless. Just harmless fun. Are you okay, Grandfather? I asked as his eyes began to bulge out and his breathing began becoming heavy. I think you should lie down a minute, I said, walking towards him, holding up his wooden cane. He held out his hand in protest and gestured me to leave it while coughing heavily. I began rubbing his back all the while, as I tried to again extend my hand to assistance. I'm not that old parasite. I'm gonna finish this story if it's the last thing I do. Alice, sweetie, do me a favor. Will you go grab the box from under my bed, will you? His face once again had that same flare as it did once before, causing me to muster a small grin. Alice ran out with the teddy bear in hand as her small form faded into the distance. Listen, boy, I want you to take Alice out. Grandfather, I can't. I'm not like you, I said, almost screaming as the thought of being ordered to kill my little sister filled me with anger. I didn't mean to murder her, you piece of shit. I meant take her out somewhere. But here, I'm gonna give you some pocket money. Just take her out to some place with animatronics or whatever these kids go to these days. Is this it? Alice asked, carrying a small brown box, old, crusty. Yeah, that's it, sweetie. Let's continue the story then. After weeks had passed, I hadn't noticed, but he showed himself less. I'll admit I was worried, so I tried the best I can to make an excuse to see him. His room was neat and tidy, and he himself was the exact definition of a perfect child. But there was something in his eyes that felt empty. When I confronted him about this, I was only greeted with a giggle and a chuckle, asking me to stop being silly, but I knew something was wrong. Come a little closer, children. We both leaned in closer as our ears perked up with intrigue. One night, when I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, I saw his eyes peeking through the small crack of the bathroom door. And I was feeling cold that night. My heart began to thump and thump, but I couldn't move. Somehow his stare had frozen me in place. I was helpless as his figure from the shadows let itself be known. And then he opened the door, got on the floor. Everybody walk the dinosaur. We both stared at our grandfather, who had a cheeky grin on his face. Good night, children, he said, as he took his cane and walked away. Brother, we've been had. I propose a plan for revenge, my little sister said, her face still devoid of any emotion apart from frustration. I'll let him have this one. Want to go out tonight, princess? My sudden engagement caused her to spring up and get ready. It was really troubling, and she didn't question anything, but I guess she is quite young after all. I scratched the back of my head, and I went to my grandfather's room. My grandfather, sitting on his bed, looked like he was expecting me to come. We exchanged looks, as we both knew that he was lying. Not about the story. About the ending of the story. You copped out, I said, as I sat on a nearby wooden chair. I did. But I don't think you'll appreciate me traumatizing your sister, now would you? Yeah, but? Tell me the real ending. I said, quite serious in tone. Of course. That's why you're here. That's why I was waiting here. We don't need to kid ourselves. We both know that I'm not that kind. I didn't check up on him for a few days. I didn't check up on him at all. The last thing I remember him telling me is that he could now hear Tony without me simulating the box game. He could do it only if he covered his ears with his fingers. So I was rid of him for about a month. Then he came up to me and he said that he wanted to see Tony. And that's when you improved the box game, right? I said sternly, causing him to raise his eyebrows up and down in approval. I improved it by numbing my senses of sight. Pretending that I couldn't see him meant that he could see his friend. At least that's what we both thought. Again, he sprinted out as he went up the stairs and into the rooftop. The rules were if you couldn't be heard, and you would hear him. You couldn't be seen, you'd see him. What he saw scared him out of his body. He didn't fall. He was dead before he reached the ground. But I guess the eyes full of fright I saw that day was the eyes of a kid falling to his death slowly. But I'm not that grossly optimistic. I know that something scared him. And that was Tony. Here you go, he said, throwing a wallet to me filled with bills. You're giving me all this? I could actually afford a social life with this. I want you to spend it on your sister. Be a brother that I never was. A good one. And if you would prefer to disappoint me, then spend it all on fleeting happiness. But I warn you, if you do, I'm gonna haunt you for the rest of your life. Haunt? You aren't dead yet. I laughed as my grandfather motioned a gun with his hands, shooting his temples. You're gonna kill yourself? Not so loud. We want to hear us, he said, grinning with his eyes closed. Not very old. My eyes weren't what they used to be back in the day, but I'm still healthy, in a sense. All that's wrong with me is my legs. My eyes still working in tip-top shape, and so do my ears. My legs. You're numb, boy. Then he gave me a look of pure horror, as he grabbed both his knees and ran his nails into them. I could feel it touching my legs. After that, I said goodbye to my grandfather. Alice, dressed in a cute dress, her teddy bear left in her room and her arms intertwined with mine. We said goodbye to our grandfather. Alice waved her hand in goodbye with pure happiness as I nodded my head. And he did as well. We both know that he was going through with it, and I guess I couldn't blame him. Along with his wallet, which held the money inside, it was also the key to his pickup truck, which was fairly unused. I drove off with Alice, who was admiring the view of the nightlife, with people buzzing about and giving them greetings as we passed by. We drove into a drive-thru as I noticed Alice pouting and giving me a look of disappointment. "This isn't cool at all," she said grumpily. Come on, don't give me that look. See? Look over there." I pointed at a bunch of people from inside the fast food restaurant hurry along with their families as I opened the door to my side and quickly opened the door to hers. I then grabbed her as we both took a seat in the back of the pickup truck. "What's gonna happen, big brother?" she asked as she leaned her head on my chest. "Something pretty," I said as the first explosion of fireworks went out, as the reflection of the spark shined in her eyes, which were 2 times their normal size. The beauty of the explosion, the shape it formed, and the mixture between blue and yellow shone in the sky like diamonds and gold. I would be in awe, but the fireworks reminded me of the inevitable. Had the bang gone off the same time as the first fireworks exploded? Was it as loud? I didn't know, but somehow something so beautiful caused me to remember something so morbid. I was always the go-with-the-flow kind of guy. I would forget something if it wasn't actually appropriate for the time being, but I couldn't forget the inevitable. Where will I find his dead body? Will I be the one to see it first? All these questions were silenced with a simple flick of my chin. "What was that for?" I asked Alice, who was glaring daggers at me. "Read the moment, big brother," she said, puffing her cheeks. I just apologized and patted her head as I hugged her beneath the stars and fireworks of the night sky. I drove back home, Alice sleeping with a look of content on her face as I picked her up into a piggyback ride. I knew she was awake. I noticed that our parents' cars weren't there. And that's good, I guess. I gently dropped her into bed, wrapped her into her blanket, gave her the teddy bear and kissed her on the cheek, not forgetting to turn on the nightlight before I left. Someone as lazy as me would be tired now. But I wasn't. Call it something preventing another. When a person wouldn't jump off a bridge because of common sense, or maybe a person who runs in the morning in order to get fit. But before I went into my grandfather's room, I noticed the box from earlier. The box Alice took from his room. I was hesitant, but I opened it anyway. And inside were books and the note. It read, "Don't worry, these aren't cursed. Be sure to read this to her if you're sick of reading the same fairy tales over and over again." I gave a small smile as I picked up the book. A fairly normal, newly bought, these definitely weren't cursed. That small smile faded when I heard a creak from my grandfather's room. They call it curiosity. Call it kindness in fear of my little sister stumbling into it. But I went and closed the door. But not before peeking. I hung my head as I closed the door from the inside. The image haunted me as I stumbled to sit in the same chair that he sat in moments ago. I was exhausted. I needed to rest, so I slept on the dining room table with my hands as pillows. Forever burnt into my mind is the image of my grandfather's corpse. Dead. Blood splattered across the wall, along with a small bullet hole. His eyes were white. His face was full of unspeakable horror, and he had a bullet hole on his shoulder. He didn't die in his own hands. My grandfather missed.